tariffs, there's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
They say America will always feed the world. But what if I told you that right now, from California to New York, tons of American corn are being sent back like unwanted packages that the world has rejected?
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
What if I told you that in Iowa, once the heartland of American agriculture, corn is rotting under the hot sun because farmers have no reason to start their harvesters? Their children are no longer going to school, not because they don't want to learn, but because there isn't even a couple of gallons of gas in the tank to get them there. This is not a hypothetical scenario, it is happening right now.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
In Illinois, freight trains that once rushed to Atlantic ports with corn now stand rusting in rows because there is no longer a buyer for that corn. In Missouri, grain packing plants are closing, not because they are broken, but because there is nothing to pack. In Nebraska, farmers gather in the morning not to discuss the harvest, but to figure out which of them will have to sell their land to Chinese companies to pay off their debts.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
And now, while America is losing its place on the world food map, Canada is quietly, without fanfare, taking over this market. Canadian corn is more expensive, but it is cleaner, GMO-free, pesticide-free, and comes with documentation certifying every grain. And while the US argues over tariffs, Canada is signing 5-year deals worth billions of dollars with Japan, South Korea, and Europe.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some, and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
While US farmers are paying 9% interest on loans and don't know if they will be able to plant next season, Canadian farmers are receiving insurance payments for every bushel lost, investing in new technology, and hiring workers to expand production.
That's a 10. That's a good one.
You may think this is a temporary storm, but the reality is much scarier. After all, if the world rejects American corn, if the largest buyers begin to value quality and transparency over price, it is not just the loss of one market, it is a crack in the very system that has sustained the pride of the American agricultural empire.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
And while farmers in Minnesota quietly sell their tractors on Craigslist to buy food for their families, Canada is loading new containers of corn onto ships in Vancouver. You may think this story is not about you, but it is precisely such crises that create a chain reaction when jobs disappear, schools close, debts grow, and with them, faith in the future disappears. Today we're going to tell you the story of how America is losing what seemed eternal and what could happen if, after corn, the world turns its back on other American goods. And then we'll ask the big question that you'll have to answer. Who are we if even our fields are no longer needed? Stay with us to learn the truth you won't hear on TV.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
America has always been proud of its ability to feed the world, but now that pride is rusting away along with the freight trains that sit in forgotten Illinois stations filled with corn that no one wants to buy. Just a few years ago, Iowa farmers smiled as they looked out over their golden fields, where every ear of corn promised profit and a secure future. Today, those same farmers look out their windows at rotting corn stalks that no one is going to harvest because the crop isn't even worth the cost of diesel fuel for the combine.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
In the suburbs of Lincoln, farmers are gathering not to discuss which seed to choose for next season, but to decide who will have to sell their family land to Chinese investment funds that are buying it up on the cheap. In Missouri, grain packing plants are closing not because of accidents, but because there is nothing left to pack on the conveyor belt. Containers are being returned to the ports, and truck drivers who used to spend days on end in their cabs are now sitting in cheap cafes with a cup of cold coffee, wondering where to find work.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
Meanwhile, farmers' children are no longer going to school, not because they are lazy, but because their fathers don't even have a couple of liters of gasoline in their tanks to drive them there. In Illinois, several school districts have already cut bus routes, leaving dozens of children unable to get to class. Teachers are conducting classes via video link, sitting in their kitchens because the air conditioning has been turned off in schools to save money, and it is impossible to sit in the hot classrooms. One teacher recounted how his daughter sat next to him during class and asked, "Dad, what's for dinner tonight?" He couldn't answer because even he didn't know what they could afford to buy. Iowa farmers who used to ship their corn to China, Japan, South Korea, and even distant African countries are now hearing the same thing. We don't need your corn anymore. They are told that it does not meet standards, that traces of pesticides have been found in it, that buyers want a clean product. In fact, there is some truth to this, as many countries have tightened quality controls. But the bigger truth is that the US is no longer a reliable partner in the global market. Political conflicts, tariff wars, threats of sanctions, all this has turned American corn from a symbol of stability into a commodity that carries risks. At the same time, Canada, seemingly a quiet and boring neighbor, is gradually taking over these markets. Canadian corn is more expensive, but it is clean, with transparent certificates free of GMOs and pesticides, and with full traceability of each container from the field to the buyer's warehouse. While the US spends millions on advertising campaigns trying to win back buyers, Canada is simply signing 5-year contracts, offering stability and trust. Japanese and Korean buyers no longer call Chicago, they fly to Toronto and Saskatoon to sign new agreements. Despair is growing among farmers in Nebraska. no longer hidden behind smiles and phrases like "we'll get through this." One farmer told a local newspaper that he left his fields unharvested because it would cost more to harvest than he would earn from selling the crop. He added that his son, who was studying to be an agronomist, switched to marketing because there is no future in agriculture. Families who once took pride in feeding America and the world are now applying for food stamps. In the suburbs of Minnesota, where fields used to be lit up at night by the headlights of harvesters during the harvest season, there is now silence. There are no train whistles, no rumbling trucks, no children shouting in the yards. Even the wind seems quieter in these places where people are beginning to realize that their world is changing forever. Some towns, such as Fort Wayne, Indiana, already resemble worn-out movie sets, where factories that once produced hundreds of harvesters a month now produce only a few a year, and half the workers have been put on shortened shifts. Waiters in cafes note that they have fewer customers and that lunch orders have disappeared because farmers and workers don't come in to order steaks and coffee because they can't afford them. Even delivery services are being cut back because when farmers aren't harvesting, they don't need transportation, spare parts, or fuel. In states where corn trading used to be a symbol of life, this symbol is now turning into a sign of decline. Fictional details add to the gloom. In Nebraska, several families have moved into trailers, renting out their homes to cover their mortgage payments. In Illinois, farmers have started bartering directly to survive. Some trade chickens for grain, others offer gasoline for potatoes, because they don't have money to buy even bread. In Iowa, a local hospital has been forced to cut its hours because donations from farmers, who have always supported the clinic, have disappeared along with their income. In Minnesota, there has been an increase in cases of depression and calls to hotlines because farmers are losing not only money but also hope. All this is happening in a country that prided itself on feeding the world. America was a symbol of agricultural power. It saved the world from starvation after wars. It was the heart of world agriculture. But today, that symbol is cracking at the seams. Because if the world rejects American corn, it rejects what was once considered unshakable. And when farmers' children stop going to school, when their parents sit at the table in silence because they don't know how to feed their families, when fields that were once golden turn into thickets of grass and weeds, the world loses more than just a commodity. It loses part of America's identity. This is not just a loss of market share. It is the beginning of a systemic crisis when, along with corn, transportation, education, healthcare, small businesses, and the hopes of millions of people who believed that their land would always feed the world begin to collapse. And while Canada signs new contracts and loads corn into containers, America is left with rotting fields and debts that no one can pay. This is the real crisis that will not make the headlines, but which is quietly destroying entire cities and lives. And if America loses corn, who is next? Milk, meat, soybeans? Or people's very belief that their labor is still needed in this world? While America treads water, Canada is turning every hectare of its fields into a growth point, every contract into a brick for the future, and every container of corn into a ticket to a new economic reality. There, across the cold border, farmers don't argue about whether to sow next season, because crop yield and price insurance payments give them confidence. They don't have to worry about whether they will have enough money for fertilizers, because government programs compensate up to 30% of the cost of environmentally friendly fertilizers that meet European standards and help introduce precision farming with drones and moisture sensors. While American farmers are racking their brains over where to get a loan at 9% or higher, in Canada, agricultural lending is holding steady at 3.2-4% per annum, enabling them to buy new combines, upgrade warehouses, and build grain dryers that reduce losses by 15%. Canadian farmers sign long-term deals that allow them to plan not just for one season, but 5 years ahead. A recent $1.2 billion contract with South Korea to supply corn from Saskatchewan is not a one-off deal, but the result of a painstaking policy that was not built in a day. Representatives of Canadian agricultural cooperatives visit Seoul, Tokyo, Hamburg, and Amsterdam every month to hold meetings where they present laboratory reports analyzing each batch of grain. Buyers see that the mycotoxin content is minimal, that there are no GMOs, and that the QR code provides accurate traceability showing the field, harvest date, and container route. This is not just corn, it is confidence that the shipment will not be returned and that the money will not be wasted. Canada is building a reputation that the US is losing by selling not just a product but trust. and that trust is worth more. A Japanese importer in Osaka said in an interview that he pays 8% more for Canadian corn because he does not have to worry that the container will be returned due to non-compliance with standards, as was the case with American supplies. This is a fictional case, but it reflects a trend in Hong Kong. A supermarket chain launched a premium line of products called Canadian Pure Corn, which sold out in 48 hours because shoppers trust the clean label mark and know that it means no pesticide residues. At the same time, American corn is losing its status due to poor certification, scandals involving the use of banned chemicals, and a lack of transparency in the supply chain. The Canadian model is based on a strategy that could be called a quiet revolution. They do not make loud statements, but year after year they buy up market share by offering importers what they want: stability, purity, and predictability. Unlike the US, where agricultural exports have become hostage to political games, tariff wars, and threats of sanctions, Canada maintains neutrality and concludes bilateral trade agreements without unnecessary noise. When Washington introduces new tariffs, Canada signs a new contract. When the US argues about subsidies, Canada invests in processing and export capacity. When American farmers protest against low prices, Canadian farmers invest in biofuel production, increasing demand for their grain. Their secret is simple: they have focused on quality. Federal and provincial programs encourage farmers to switch to glyphosate-free technologies, adopt organic farming, and install weather stations and moisture sensors in their fields to optimize irrigation. Even in Saskatchewan, where the climate is harsh, farmers are using new cold-resistant corn varieties, which have allowed them to expand their acreage by 12% over the past 2 years. These investments are paying off. Corn exports from Canada have grown by 38% in 5 years, at a time when the US is losing contracts. Importantly, Canada is not only interested in price. They understand that the world is changing and that importers demand clean supply chains, compliance with climate agreements, and transparent certification. That is why Canada is investing in digital cargo tracking platforms using blockchain to record every stage of a shipment's movement, which reduces the likelihood of counterfeiting and errors. Representatives of Canadian ports at meetings in Europe cite fictitious but illustrative data. The average Canadian corn shipment deviates in only 0.02% of cases, while in the US this figure can reach 2.5% due to violations of standards. This inspires confidence, which buyers value more than discounts. While American farmers are wondering whether it is worth taking the risk of planting corn again, Canadian farmers are signing new contracts and hiring seasonal workers to expand their acreage. In Canada, there is a growing number of farming cooperatives that allow small farmers to join forces to access better credit, insurance programs, and storage infrastructure. The government is actively involved in negotiations with trading partners, acting not as a regulator but as a partner lobbying for the interests of its producers on the international stage. While farmers in the US feel alone in their battle with the global market, farmers in Canada feel part of a system where their interests are protected. This difference in approach is the very crack that is growing between the two countries, because the world no longer buys just grain. It buys reputation, stability, and purity. And while the US hopes that its status as an agricultural superpower will solve everything, Canada is gradually taking its market away. This is not happening overnight. It is a process that has been going on for years, but it has already changed the balance of power. Here is a fictional but illustrative case from Seoul. Korea's largest importer signs a 5-year contract with Canada, adding a clause to the agreement that in the event of a breach of quality standards, Canada undertakes to refund the money and cover logistics costs. This clause was signed because Canada has not committed a single breach in the last 3 years. The US was not even invited to participate in the tender because its reputation as a supplier had already been undermined by returns and disputed shipments. The world is no longer waiting, the world is choosing. Canada was ready for this moment, having invested in its farmers' logistics, clean technology, and transparency. And while farmers in the US are forced to sell their combines and tractors at auction to pay off their debts, Canadian farmers are preparing for the next season by expanding their crops and building new warehouses. This is not a loud revolution. It is a quiet takeover of the market that is happening before the eyes of the whole world. And when tomorrow the world chooses between American and Canadian corn, it will choose not price but confidence.